called the Spectrum Survey. Now, in sex and gender, people think of it as absolute male, absolute female. You're a man or a woman, and that's just not true. Sex and gender lie on a spectrum. And in the middle of that spectrum, you have LGBTQ, you have intersex, you have asex, you have all kinds of variety of people. So the point of this interview is to ask as many people as possible some questions and get to know about their spectrum, where they lie on the spectrum. And today we have Kris. Thank you for doing this. You were actually my very first one. So I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and we'll get to know about where you are in the spectrum, and also some questions about how you dealt with it growing up, how you came to know about it, and what kind of struggles you went through dealing with your part on the spectrum. Does that make sense? Okay. Oops, I'm bouncing around. Okay, so we already know your name. Please tell us your name, and if you don't have, I tell people if you don't want to use your real name, don't have to use your real name. You can use an alias, but we already know you're Kris, so we got that answered. Oh, does Kris have a last name? Do you want to tell?
No.
Okay. Number 2, where are you from, and where do you live now?
I am from the central part of the U.S., somewhere in Missouri.
Okay.
And I've been in there my whole life. So.
Okay. So Missouri is a pretty conservative state. Yeah. Number 3, what is your gender identity?
My gender identity is agender, and my pronouns are they, them.
They and them. Now, how do we use those when I'm talking? Okay, it's just when I'm talking to you in the third person about you, it's just they, them.
Correct. So, like,
of course, when I'm talking to you, I say you.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. But yeah, in place of any time you would say he or she or her or him, they and them are what you use instead.
Okay. I don't have this question down, but can you tell me a little bit more about the agender? Do you have a mix of qualities between male and female, or do you just have none at all?
So it's none at all. So agender, so whenever you actually talk about the spectrum of gender and sexuality, it helps to actually think of it less as a linear spectrum and more of like that color wheel that, it's like pick a color on this gigantic wheel and that's where you are. That's the one that kind of identifies you. And agender actually falls outside of the color wheel. It's the space outside of it. Right. So for me, I don't experience any connect with gender at all.
Okay. Very interesting.
Yeah. Some agender people describe it instead as there's a gender there, but it has no real solid definition or form. But it's really just this concept of no gender describes you. I
actually created a logical proof that sex and gender cannot be objectively defined. I'll tell you about it later, but it's a proof. I mean, it's an irrefutable proof about how a definition works, because there is no definition. There literally isn't. Definition must always be true, and there's nothing that's always true about sex and gender. But anyway, let's go on. Okay. So we already asked, what are your preferred pronouns? They're they and them. Okay. What is your so-called biological sex? What were, and if okay, go ahead.
Sorry.
What is your so-called biological sex that they assigned you at birth?
Female.
Female. Okay. And is there any? This might be a little bit more intimate, but is there any kind of? Do you have any kind of intersex? Physical. Okay, so you're
none that I'm aware of.
Okay, yeah, I'm not either. I could have 3 X chromosomes. I never know.
Right.
Never have my DNA taken. Okay. What is your sexual orientation? And if you don't have a sexual orientation, which I believe you don't because you're asex, just tell us.
So my sexual orientation is asexual. And my romantic orientation is interested in masculine people is the best way I put it, because to say like or hetero romantic or straight doesn't really work when you're already on the non-binary spectrum.
Gotcha. So it could be, I mean, a masculine man, but also a masculine, we say man or woman, masculine woman as well.
Yeah, masculine person is more.
I like a
My,
masculine too. I love a masculine man. Okay, so that part is basically the spectrum part where you are asex, you are hetero-romantic, attracting romantically to masculine people. You are agender, and you are biologically a woman. If there's really true no definition, but that's so called for the sake of argument. Okay, so now let's go on to how you grew up and dealt with this and understood this whole situation. At what age did you begin to notice there was something different about you?
so it really came to light in like preteen and teen years, more with the asexuality than with the gender, but it was there with both of them. So whenever my peers were getting interested in a variety of things like, they were getting interested in boys in ways that I didn't understand. Um, they were getting like they were really into like dresses and all kinds of things, or like really into like forms of identity that were very feminine, and none of it clicked with me the same way. I was always a little bit of the weird kid. um and I still had friends. We all just got along, and I like performed through it. I was like, well, I guess I'm just the odd duck out. I'm that one person who just doesn't get it. I'm just going to try to get it as best I can so I can keep up. And so there was always this performance I was putting on.
That's a question I got later on.
And I didn't even realize it. I didn't know about asexuality or the non-binary spectrum until I was in my early 20s. So I didn't even know I was doing this
Well,
faking
that's
it.
the next question is, what age did you finally realize you were?
Um, so I figured both out actually right around the same time. I was about 23 years old. And it was via just online forums, because nobody in my life, nobody that I knew really was representative of me. But the internet's a wonderful way to connect with people, and with people who you'd never
Absolutely.
otherwise know about.
The Facebook
And
groups are golden.
it actually, and it's like side tangent on that, it makes me sad whenever people are like, social media is killing our ability to communicate. It's like, for people who just use it to share memes, maybe it's
Yeah,
not the means of communication, but for some people it's the only way they can find others like themselves and really form a sense of community and understanding, and begin to understand the different types of people that are out there, and to feel less alone in those similar differences, I
yeah,
guess.
definitely. Especially like I see before, I've never really met an ace person until just a few days ago. I never really talked to, because I wanted to say I'm gonna go find some LGBT, some trans, some intersex, some asex, and I found this group, and hundreds of people responded to me. I'm just amazed because I'm so curious. I think that asex is the most curious thing to me, because it's like, it's like being colorblind, and you don't know you're colorblind, and then one day somebody gives you the colorblind test and like, oh, I don't see what you see.
And it's even harder for asexual people who experience other forms of attraction as well. So whenever you're asexual, aromantic, you're just not attracted to anybody at all. You know that there's a disconnect. You know that you're definitely different.
Gotcha.
Um, and there's just something about you that's very different from your peers, in regards to this thing that they seem obsessed with and you want nothing to do with.
Yeah.
Whenever you do experience other forms of attraction, it's subtler, and it's one of those things where there's definitely a disconnect. But you're like, but I want to date guys. I want to, I want to have relationships. I want to, kiss guys and stuff. Like,
Yeah.
so I don't know what's so different about the way I experience it and the way other people seem to experience it, but I can just tell there's something a little off
It's like
about the
like
way I do
like
things.
maybe there's a part of the brain that it has to do with like romance and personal feelings and emotions, and then there's the other part it's connected to that just is purely sexual. Maybe one side is turned on, but the other side, the sexual side, is turned off. Like there's no connection there to those hormones. It's so interesting to me. I mean, And in a way, I feel. Can you see me? Is this too bright?
That was a little bright. There you go.
There we go. Okay. In a way, I kind of feel bad for asex people because they don't really ever experience that feeling. But I kind of am happy for you, you know.
So the way I always describe it is imagine like a triangle, and that's like a spectrum of things you're capable of feeling. And in one spot, there's sexual attraction. There's a tiny triangle filled in at the top that's sexual attraction.
Okay.
And when you don't have someone in your life, you feel like that piece is missing.
Yeah.
For asexual people, it's just a trapezoid. That entire section doesn't exist. So
Gotcha.
there's no missing
Yeah.
piece because there's
You're
no
never
space
going to
for
see the
this.
color. If you're colorblind, you're not going to miss the color, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's just something that so not having it, the only issue you run into is social, because
Yeah.
suddenly people expect things of you whenever you're like,
It's-
I'm not, I'm not part of the majority. It is a minority of a sexuality, and whenever you're not part of the majority, people just automatically assume things instead of figuring out you specifically. So
It's especially with kids because kids are so congregational and they have to fit into somewhere. And if somebody doesn't fit, it's like they have to feel better to fit in the group by attacking others. I mean, I don't know if you ever attack. Well, that comes to my next question. At what age did you ever come out? And at what age did you come out to your friends or family to who you were?
so there's a fun phrase I like, and it's, you never really stop coming out. Because it is constant. Whenever I found out at 23 is whenever I started telling people. I've never really told my family much because it doesn't concern them. I date people and that's all they know. I've told friends, but it's because it's come up in conversation. I tell my partners because it's very relevant.
Do they know? See, I don't want to get too too detailed or explicit, but do they know that you don't want that part of them? They just want.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't have any questions about romantic. I should have put some down, but I would like to hear some more.
So the way that it works for me is I have to be with someone who's secure enough in themselves that their partner doesn't have to validate them in everything. Because I've unfortunately run into that in a relationship where someone knowing that they weren't sexually desirable to me, even though I'm completely incapable of that, like it has nothing to do with them. Nobody does that for me.
Exactly.
It hurt their ego too much. Versus being with someone who's like, okay, that's just something you don't have. That's fine. I know I'm great. I know I'm hot. I'm fine with myself. and that like self-confidence is enough for them because they're just like, okay, it's just something you don't have. That's fine. You still obviously like me for other reasons. You're dating me.
Do you still, when you find, so does looks play? Do looks play in it at all? Like, do you have to, or is it just?
So here's the fun of attraction. For your average person, attraction, there's several kinds. There are more kinds of attraction than just like romantic and sexual. They tend to all align. So asexual people often function in what's called the split attraction model. And it can split into more than just those two. So for me, I'm asexual. I'm attracted to masculine, but I also experience aesthetic attraction, which is thinking that someone is like gorgeous. There's sensual attraction, which is desire for physical affection, non-sexual physical affection, cuddling, kissing, hand holding. There's a list of things that vary.
Is that part of the romantic part, or is that it's just kind of linked a little bit?
Romantic is like an emotional connection type thing. So you have platonic connection and romantic connection, and they do have, and not to like say platonic is lesser with the hand motions, but you have like platonic connection, attraction and romantic attraction, and they do have different feelings, but those are actually on an emotional spectrum. Versus something like a desire for physical touch, which is more on a physical spectrum.
Now, how can you tell the difference between just purely platonic and sensual? Like, that's hard because you got friends that you're platonic with, and you want to hug them and give them a kiss on the cheek and stuff. But there's a line where you draw into sensual.
So yep, there's that line between sensual and sexual. But there's also so these things don't all have to be reserved for romantic relationships. Like sensual doesn't have to be reserved for romantic. I get to see memes a lot online of, can we normalize cuddling our friends, please?
Yeah.
Because as a society in Western culture, we do vilify touch unless it's in a
Exactly.
relationship,
Sex.
and there's
It's
no reason
sex.
for that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are some people who, gosh, I'm kind of going dark. There are some people who are more, like some people are more open just to, even if it's just with another buddy, to like hug and grab on, but there's this stigma in society where anytime, any kind of like form of that kind of affection just has to have some kind of sexual undertones to it.
Yeah.
That's
Or
kind of the
even,
way in
yeah,
America, especially.
either sexual, romantic, some relationship is there for some reason. And it's like, no, we're friends. You
Okay,
can't.
so you're still coming out. Did you come out to your parents?
I haven't come out. So I'm out as a gender to my parents. But I'm not out as asexual because it wasn't really relevant enough to talk to them about.
Sure. Do they find your kind of romantic interest to be like, they say, oh, okay, well, they assume that there's a sexual component to it or something? Do they think you're sexually active, is what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, probably, honestly.
But you've never told them.
Yeah, I'll say with my parents, that's not a topic either of us were ever comfortable with.
I
It's
understand
yeah.
that.
So some people have like a more like open blase relationship with their parents. Mine was always much
Exactly.
more reserved.
I couldn't go sit with my mom and say, hey, mom, this guy I thought was hot, man. Did you? That's not happening.
Yeah.
Okay. Have you ever, you kind of spoke about this earlier, but have you ever resisted who you were and tried to force yourself to be normal? Did you go through that stage?
Before I realized it, yes. And it was actually some of the lowest points of my life where my life was like between 19 and 22, because I entered the professional world. And in the professional world, women have a very specific way they're supposed to dress, they're supposed to act, and the show became, the performance became less of an automatic thing and more of a conscious, I have to perform, I have to perform, I have to perform, I have to be this person. And I always felt like I was failing at it too, and I hated it. One of the best years for me was whenever I started to come out and I started wearing what I wanted to. I chopped all my
So
hair
you
off.
started off with dresses and you did the whole dress thing and
I was never big on like dresses and skirts, but like, blouses and sweaters, slacks, flats. I had very long hair. My hair was halfway down my back because I was always trying to get it to do something. It looked terrible because I didn't know how to take care of it.
yeah.
It was a struggle. And whenever I
There
started
are YouTube
figuring,
videos for that. Let's figure
right,
fix your hair up.
I had about a foot of dead ends. Like it was bad.
Jeez.
Um, but yeah, and then I ended up figuring out who I was. And from there, I started experimenting more and actually like trying out different presentation, different clothing, different mixtures of stuff. And that's when it hit. I was like, oh my God, I can feel good about how I look.
Yeah,
Can
definitely.
I can feel comfortable with myself actually, instead of always feeling like I'm trying to fit what I'm supposed to do.
I'm a little bit older than you, but your generation is really pushing that. That's not skirts and suits for men and women have to do it's that is dying out because I mean sure some women still of course they wear skirts and men wear but the stigma with like not conforming to your dress code as a boy or girl or whatever is going away and that's good to see because we had a lot of trouble with that when I was in school even in the 90s. It was kind of heartbreaking to see some of them. um okay, so all right, here's a good one. Have your parents or any other influence tried to force you to be normal?
Um,
No, and I say
never.
normal, of course, like that.
Yeah. to go to their version of normal. No one's ever tried to force it, and I'm actually very lucky because I work in a professional field. I actually work in banking, which is a very conservative field.
Yeah.
And even then, my boss and our clients and stuff have never mentioned anything about how I dress or present, because if you present a gender neutral dress code, I'm within dress code. So no one's ever said anything. But the most pushback I think I've ever fully received was from my mother, who right after coming out tried to make it about her and said things like, you don't have to be transgender, you don't have to be agender, you could just be like a tomboy. Like, why does it have to be something different?
Gotcha. Okay.
And I was actually really lucky because my dad turned around and shut her down.
Okay.
For me, so.
That's good. I'm glad you have parents who accepted. Well, that's kind of like my question. No, that's a little bit later. Um, so you didn't really have a strong resistance where you felt like if I'm not normal, then my life is not good. You had a little bit of that, but not a lot, right?
Yeah. The resistance has definitely been much more subtle in anything I've received. It's like little comments and things. It's never anything like blatantly like that won't fly or you can't do that. It's when someone isn't on board or doesn't accept it, they're a lot more subtle with it.
Yeah.
So, which is
Some people are not. Okay. What was the hardest moment accepting or coming to terms with your identity?
Coming to terms with the fact that this was the most authentic and happiest I'd ever felt in my life, and that I was always going to live with knowing the fact that I'm not normal, I'm not protected, I'm not recognized by most places as as someone on the non-binary spectrum, and I'm like going to face so much both overt and subtle opposition from it. And like even it's going to result in things like me wanting to hide just so I don't have to deal with the constant lashing out.
Did you ever have any instance where somebody really attacked you for your identity?
I'm lucky no one has ever actually attacked me. I think I've gotten a couple like negative comments on random like online forums, but usually admins just delete those right away. It's not even a thing I have to worry about. But I've never had someone attack me either like physically or verbally. But I also kind of cherry pick my social group to avoid that. I keep away from people as
Well,
much as
both in real life and on social media.
yeah.
Okay, this isn't on the list, but do ace people, do they go to like gay bars? Or do they go to I think those
So
fit in.
there's an interesting split here among asexual people. So personally, I like it. I enjoy it. I enjoy the atmosphere. I enjoy just a space where you can be
Me
openly
too.
queer and it's celebrated. It's not
Yeah.
just accepted, it's celebrated, which is
Yeah.
great. But the flip side is a lot of asexual people, bar scenes in general tend to be somewhere sexual. It's alcohol heavy. It's there's a heavy hookup culture with it, and asexual people are like, okay,
I just want to party.
I just want to party.
Yeah.
It's really funny because a running joke that pops up every now and then is like, we need gay cafes. Like, screw the alcohol side of it. You have a gay cafe where everyone there is queer, and like you see someone reading a book or like working on knitting or something in the corner with a really good drink, and that's what makes you go strike up a
It's
conversation.
sober.
So not only a place of that's not sexually driven, but also a place that's not alcohol driven.
Yes, not sober people. I have my moments in gay bars, but sometimes it's a little too much.
Yeah. So
Okay, so all right. Here's a little bit more personal. Have you ever considered and or attempted suicide based on your identity? Have you ever considered it, or you don't seem like the type who attempt it, but go ahead.
Yeah, it's never been a serious enough concern for me to like seek help or to attempt. And it's never been directly related to my gender or sexuality. For me, it's the worst I've had is like passing thoughts, ones that are able to be shut down properly. So I'm very lucky in that regard.
Yeah,
Uh, and I've but like I said, I'm also really lucky that I don't get attacked a lot in real
that
life
has a
either.
lot to do with it. And I feel so horrible about these new laws where they're just attacking trans people. That just makes me want to cry. And they have to go through that, and that's just makes it worse. You know, it's hard enough being alive, just being a person in general, and then when you're different in some way, it makes it so much harder. And then when a society attacks you directly, that's when, you know, so many suicides in the trans community.
41%.
What's that for?
41% of transgender people attempt or commit suicide.
Oh my gosh.
That is the statistic.
Wow.
And a lot of that is driven from internalized self-hatred due to external stimulus. And, inability or inaccessibility to transgender healthcare, or ability to transition. Lack of acceptance from family is a big one. General social stigma, inability to find work as a transgender person. There's so many right to work or at will employment states. They can fire you for anything. And unless you can directly prove that it's related to you being transgender, like a direct comment, they can
Yeah.
just write it off as your work isn't good enough and fire you on the spot. Stuff like that creates fear of people coming out and creates situations where I'm lucky that I don't experience such extreme dysphoria that it makes me suicidal. Some people do, and they are completely unable to address that in their lives.
I did for like a while. It was a bad situation for me, but I just one day I was like, "You're not going to change yourself. I mean, live. What's the point of, you know?" And it's as hard as this for gays and lesbians and like asex people, for trans people, it just must be 10 times harder. It really just I can't even imagine. As hard as it was for me, I can imagine what it was for trans people. Okay, so okay. I'm sure you know this answer, but do you have a support group, friends and family who accept you fully?
Yes, largely friends, and like found family type thing, but yeah, definitely.
Not so much in family.
Um, Most of my older family, like anyone my parents and above in age, I just straight up haven't come out to. Unfortunately, my parents and I are no contact for a variety of reasons now.
Not
But
just related to your identity.
yeah.
Okay.
And but my siblings, I have two siblings, and they are extremely supportive and very nice and helpful. One of them actually has a kid who's going through figuring out their gender identity, so I've been like a source of,
Oh, really?
yeah.
That
And
would be
she,
your niece?
yeah. And my sister's just super supportive of it. She's just like, okay,
That's good.
Kris, explain it to me so that I do this right.
Okay, yeah. You're the go-to for the
um, so
You're
yeah, they were both like on board within 30 seconds. They were like, okay, that's a thing. Let's go. And then I have a bunch of friends who are, most of them are LGBT in some format anyway.
Are
So
most of your support group online, or do you have a support group in person?
I do have in-person support.
Okay. Yeah, I do too. It was hard to find, but okay. So this is going quite well. I like this. Okay, this is I got to ask this, but it's not too personal. But have you ever been the victim of sexual harassment, assault, or rape?
Sexual harassment, inevitably, yes. Just nothing extremely specific. Okay, a couple of specific things pop to mind, but it was never like a cornered situation. No more than being a cashier or a coworker with someone who's really really inappropriate that you should probably report, but no one's going to do anything about it.
Hands-on or just verbal?
Just verbal. Just
Okay.
they laugh it all off like they're joking, and you're just like, that's harassment, buddy. And if I try to talk to anybody about it, it's just going to blow up instead.
Any specific examples?
Like, I was a cashier, and there was a guy who would come through, and he harassed every girl there who was younger than 25. Just inappropriate comments, just and you're stuck in customer service mode. So you can't tell this guy off. It's not like he's cornered you and you're both just out in public. You're at work. And on top of it, I was 19. I don't know how to address people who are like adults. This guy was probably in his 50s when I'm 19. You don't have you're not trained in the autonomy to tell people no, or to tell them they're making you uncomfortable. And which is another shift I'm seeing in parenting, interestingly enough.
How so?
As opposed to how I was raised, you have to give your relatives a hug. You have to let your weird uncle kiss you on the cheek, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
A lot of parents nowadays are shifting toward, you can say no. Your 2-year-old doesn't want to give someone a hug, they can say no.
That was not in my family. It was always hug and kiss. Well, I mean, like the men didn't kiss. Sometimes they did, but yeah. It's like a tradition that's dying off, like everything else. Like these, I don't know if it's a family tradition or a societal or a gender, kind of like when men hug and or shake hands, and then women, they, But I totally agree with that.
But yeah, it's this concept of like teaching your kids that they have ownership of their body from a young age.
Do you have any issues like with space? Like you need your space, or are you cool with hugging people? Or depending.
It varies heavily, but depending on the person.
Okay. Cool.
For me, it varies heavily depending on the person. I've grown much more comfortable with it in years, but there's also a great shift. A lot of people I know now, instead of saying hug, they ask first. They literally say, "Are you a hugger?" Before they even try to give you a hug, which is cool to me. And honestly, that makes me more likely to want to hug them, because I'm like, oh, we're starting this off with respective boundaries. Let's go.
Yeah. Okay. You got your space. I got my space.
But yeah, on the subject of like harassment, that, and then just there have been a couple coworkers in the past who just, so it's that they're like right on that line where they know they can get away with what they're saying and laugh it off as a joke, and you're just like,
yeah, well, you can't hit them, but you want to slap them a little bit. I've been sexually harassed before, halfway assaulted. I kind of just, I can take care of myself. If somebody actually tried to come after me, I could take care of them, but it's annoying as hell. It really is. It's just not fun when they do that. And they think they have the right sometimes, Okay, anyway. Do you or have you ever had, and I think we already answered this, a romantic or sexual experience? And have you or ever had a romantic or sexual partner?
Yes to both.
Okay. So you have, not to get too detailed, but you have had sexual experience and a partner. Okay.
Yes. So this is the interesting thing about asexuals. If
Tell
you've
us,
met
please.
one asexual person, you've met one asexual person. There's another spectrum that comes up, and it's where you fall in sexual aversion. So there's sex averse, which you don't want at all. Sex neutral, where it's okay, could do, fine. And then sex favorable, which is actually someone who enjoys sex. And
that is so interesting to me.
So someone who doesn't experience sexual attraction to other people can still have a libido, can still be like, one of the messages I sent before was literally like, brain wants happy chemicals.
Yes, so, yeah, I remember.
Yeah,
that's a good way to put it.
which is generally how I describe my personal experience with it is, it's like, it's just your brain is used to that being a really good way to get those endorphins. It doesn't bother me at all physically or anything. And if you're with someone you're comfortable with, it can be an enjoyable experience. So I definitely fall on, depending on the day, I tend to shift a little bit between like sex favorable and sex neutral.
Okay.
But there are some asexual people out there who are hard sex averse, no matter what. They are never going to want sex, and they are never going to be comfortable with sex. And it's all really about consent at that point. What are you okay with, and what do you or do you not consent to? Because even in a sexual relationship, there are times where partners won't want sex, or you're going to say no. And it's understanding and respecting consent the whole way that really makes relationships with an asexual person work.
What is the conversation like when you get to that point? Like, you're like, I'm not blooming for you, but I like you. Like that.
I like, I'm comfortable.
Is it like a fit? Do you get physical, like, the basic physical pleasure out of it, or is it just mostly emotional?
So it is actually the physical pleasure out of it.
Okay.
Yeah. It's
That's amazing.
so there's arousal, which doesn't have to be directed at something.
Gotcha.
Pretty much everyone can relate to the point of its.
I think I have a question like that. People still have the physical response without any. Go ahead.
Yeah, there doesn't even have to be a trigger sometimes. Like it's just one of those things where you're just like, well, I'm in a mood. Got nothing to direct it at, but.
That's amazing. Oh my gosh.
And I think a lot of people can relate to that. So, so yeah, as much as there's, it gets interesting with asexual and aromantic people, because you tease apart all the little pieces that make up like sex versus sexuality versus romance versus sensuality. Like you tease the pieces apart. And for me, it's fun to examine. Like I enjoy it.
It's like a science experiment, sort of.
Yeah. If you're finding all the building blocks, like instead of just saying it's water, it works. You're like, why does it work? And how does it all connect?
Oh yeah, that's true. I think a lot of people do have people who are just like normal sex or whatever. It works and they don't even think about why. Do you ever have anybody that you get to that point and then like maybe you don't want what they want and they get mad at you? Or so upset. Maybe not mad, but upset. What's that? Say that again. I'm sorry.
So this is where the comfort level thing comes in. For me, a random hookup wouldn't really happen. I would only be comfortable being with someone who I already knew respected my boundaries in general as a person.
Oh my God, that's the exact opposite for me. I had hookups like crazy. Don't even know their names. I don't even know who they are. I don't even remember their faces.
Yeah. So I'm choosy, but that's just me.
I'm choosy like visually, not emotionally. Like you have to have. Okay. So yeah, you had somebody who kind of got upset with you because you weren't on the same page with them.
Yeah, I did. And that was actually a very long-term relationship for me. And whenever I came out as like we were already in a relationship, but when I came out as asexual, his ego took a hit, and it was kind of rough after that.
Yeah, I can imagine it would, because it's like, why don't you like me like that?
Like I never have. Nothing's actually changed. So that was interesting, was just seeing how his mindset was different.
Did you guys leave on bad terms?
There was a lot that caused us to leave, because tangential, I'm also polyamorous, so
okay,
a lot happened. And
you were playing the field.
Yeah, and his ego couldn't handle basically anything that wasn't centrally focused on him entirely. Gotcha. So
I guess it's understandable, but That must be hard because it's not a upfront, I am this, I am that. It's just like after a while you say, sorry, that's just me.
Yeah.
Was that
Yeah. And I
was,
discovered all of this while I was in that relationship.
was
So
that person also a sexual partner, or was that not? Okay. Okay, so what was it that he didn't get from you? The emotion or the connection?
for him it was the desirability. His self-esteem was so low, he had to know that he was desirable to me. And as soon as he figured out he wasn't, because I figured that out and I was, going through a huge self-discovery period.
In your early 20s?
Yeah. And for him it was this disconnect of he's not desirable, was how he
Gotcha.
was emotionally interpreting it. um yeah, he probably would have benefited from some therapy, but um it's been, we've both moved on with our lives. We're both in much better places now that we're not together.
Gosh, I'm supposed to ask you these questions. Okay. I don't know if we have a whole lot of time
Mhm.
for these. You've actually answered almost all of them. Let me go to the final question, and we are at about 40 minutes. So finally, what message would you like to give to the people who say you chose this lifestyle, who say you're morally wrong, or who say if you wanted to that you could change it and that you are mentally ill and you need mental health? What would you say to those
um,
people?
Actually, there's a couple different responses depending on what specific phrase they use. You chose this lifestyle. Does it matter? Who am I hurting?
That's Yeah, actually this is
um
America.
what you're doing is immoral or wrong. According to who? Because we're a secular nation and most of the immorality stuff comes from a religious backing.
Yeah.
um you could change if you wanted to. I've tried that. It really sucked because I wasn't being my happiest self. Why would I want to change anything from my happiest self? Again, it hurts no one else.
Okay.
So,
And you're mentally ill. What do you say to that?
oh, you're mentally ill. My therapist agrees, but this is not the part of me that's mentally ill.
Okay. You got some other I got a little bipolar and issue, so I know what you mean. So I'm not mentally ill like with who I am. I'm just mentally ill like I gotcha.
Yeah. There's something else. Yeah, no. I am. It's just not in regards to my gender or sexuality. My therapist has
Exactly.
already cleared me on those fronts.
Gotcha. That's a different issue, but I think, well, finally, the last, I think a lot of people who are in this spectrum do have some kind of tangential, that's a word you just used to, uh, but it's almost correlated, but not directly caused, like depression, anxiety, bipolar, sometimes even some form of psychosis, if possible. So I would say to the people who have those issues, don't link them directly to who you are. That might be just something completely different. This is a great conversation. Kris, you were my first one here. You were you did a fantastic job. Thank you so much. And I'm going to put this up on YouTube and I'll send you the link.
All right.
Everybody say hi and bye to Kris, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank y'all for coming.
Thanks. Bye.